Welcome to our podcast, Tune In with MPSCS. My name is Chris Kuhl, Member Outreach and Communications, and with me today from the hot seat is Brad Stoddard, the Director of Michigan's Public Safety Communications System, or MPSCS as we know it. Under Director Stoddard's guidance, MPSCS has become an internationally recognized statewide P25 700 800 MHz digital trunked radio network that ensures interoperable communications between local, state, federal, tribal, and all private first responders in Michigan. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Chris. It's great to be on the podcast today. I know it's been an opportunity for quite some time, as from the idea and the concept to create the podcast today. It's a great opportunity to be here. Thank you.
Your background is very wide-ranging and all-encompassing. You've been the director of MPSCS for how long?
This year would be 16 and a half years back in the role.
And I see some of the other accomplishments or roles that you serve. You've been the Statewide Interoperability Coordinator, or SWIC, for the past 15 years. You're involved in countless work groups with the National Council of Statewide Interoperability Coordinators, as well as the vice chair for the nationwide organization. You serve on 6 state FEMA 5 regional emergency communications coordination working group for the past 11 years, and you've been fulfilling the role as the chair for the past 13 years. You had previously chaired the APCO Broadband Committee. You've served on the Federal Communications Commission's Past Emergency Response Interoperability Center. You've been recognized in 2016 by Radio Resource Mission Critical Communications as a most influential thought leader in the area of land mobile radio communications. Prior to this position at the state of Michigan, you had served as the Director of Information Technology for the Michigan State Police, the Michigan Department of Military and Veterans Affairs, and the Michigan Department of Transportation. Prior to joining the state of Michigan, you held roles with the U.S. Department of Defense at the Joint National Test Facility, aiding in the development of technologies utilized by the armed forces and federal agencies around the globe in the areas of missile defense, wargaming, and joint theater planning. That is a very wide-ranging, very impressive resume.
Well, thank you, Chris. Probably as I hear you say that, I realize I probably need to update my bio a little bit. Been a member of NICSWIC since, as far back as that organization was created. I held the vice chair actually back prior to COVID, and then around the COVID time frame, I was nominated and voted in as my peers as the chair, and have been through 2 elections and still continue to be the chair. So fortunately, I have a new vice chair of that, a retiring vice chair, Carla Jurns, out of Texas. She'll be retiring this year, and a new vice chair for NICSWIC will be coming in, Greg, out of North Carolina. So that organization is not only helped us as a state, but our peers around the nation help one another in multi-facets of interoperability, from the challenges we all face to the challenges that some might face. So it's been a great opportunity to be part of that organization. Same can be said with our FEMA Region 5 RecWig. Been involved with that since its inception, and we've watched it grow from a mere 20, maybe 24 individuals to now it's upwards of almost 500 personnel, many of those as associate members, but watching the growth across our 6 states has been great to see. And fortunately, with what we've been accomplishing in Michigan with Michigan's Public Safety Communication System, since 1995, we've been recognized as the nation's leader in this space. And with that comes a lot of these other opportunities, as other organizations want to get our insight and input, and as many of those you identified, some of those seemingly were a long time ago. A lot of technology has happened, since then. But I look back at my career as a young engineer out of college, some opportunities with space and defense, and subsequently with the state of Michigan through the Michigan State Police. I'd say it's been a wonderful almost 27 years with the state of Michigan. I think next February will be 27 years. So a lot I've been able to do with state and even with my space and defense partners. At that time, oddly, I worked for a company, two different companies. One was Allied Signal. I don't think they exist anymore. I think they were acquired by other defense companies. And TRW also was acquired by other defense companies. So a lot has changed in probably the past 30 years of my career, but it's been very enlightening here with the state of Michigan and learning not only how the technology works and people works, but also how to play the chess game in state government as well.
I know that you touched on it a little bit, but for maybe the casual listener out there, could you maybe summarize what your role as the SWIC and probably by extension NIC-SWIC would involve?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Chris. My role as the Statewide Interoperability Coordinator, it was actually a role that the Department of Homeland Security had identified. I think it was back in 2007 timeframe as part of some significant grant dollars that would be rolling out to the states for interoperable communications or creating interoperability that was believed didn't exist in the early part of the 2000s and prior. Department of Homeland Security essentially identified every state to define a SWIC. And then the role has changed as the SWIC from that day to what we see today, and much as what we've seen with our own interoperable governing board for the state of Michigan, we've really adopted those changes as part of that is the changing role of the SWIC. And today in the space back then, I started as a deputy SWIC and then subsequently moved to the SWIC as the primary SWIC had moved to a different role, and there was a better belief at the time that what we were focused on here at the MPSCS was a greater part of interoperability, and it was a much better alignment as the SWIC and that of the MPSCS. But at that time, we were focused on really land mobile radio interoperability. Back in 2007, 2008, for probably, and still do, but that was a primary focus. Since then, we're focused on, amateur radio, public alerting. Some of the other, aspects that we've adopted has been, part of a greater collaboration with our 911 partners, and we've watched that change through the years as well. As it's definitely a greater partnership that we have today than what we had probably a better part of 20 years ago. So what we know is interoperability, not only within our state, but what was defined creating the SWIC continues to evolve. And even in some of those discussions that we've had as the NIC-SWIC organization have focused on those challenges that we see today around encryption or cybersecurity or even succession planning has been a regular conversation we've had within the NIC-SWIC community. But there's other areas that we've brought our expertise to different committees of NIC-SWIC, and that has been around funding and sustainment. How we've been able to do things here in Michigan and how that may have helped other states around the funding and sustainment of either constructing a statewide radio system or finding solutions to financially maintaining those other statewide systems around the nation. So there's a lot of expertise that we have as an organization, that we have as a state, that is helping our peers in the other states and territories around the umbrella of interoperability and all the facets that play whether it be a light or heavy hand in greater collaboration with our state, local, federal, tribal, and private partners.
We talked a little bit earlier when we were running through your backgrounds. You held a position with APCO on the Broadband Committee, and some of our listeners may be questioning how that space relates to communications or interoperable communications. Could you touch on that a little bit about your roles with APCO and what the crossover to this current space of MPSCS or land mobile radio systems is?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Chris. So this goes back to a time that predated what we know as FirstNet today. The APCO Broadband Committee, this is probably back later part of the early 2000s, was created to help identify what might be some requirements and work efforts of what we would know is, a nationwide broadband type of solution for public safety. And, at that time, I was pretty fortunate to be, just a member of APCO Broadband Committee, because it was a who's who in this space around the country, from, government standpoint as well as private sector partners. A lot of very smart people were involved in those efforts, and fortunately, I was lucky enough to be part of that. And then, as the chair at the time was leaving his role in local government, his suggestion, I was his vice chair for most of that, and his suggestion was to APCO that I would, take over in his absence, and that was supported by the APCO leadership, the president of APCO at the time, and the supporting committee and the APCO organization to take that on. And it was interesting because many of the efforts that we were taking on at that time weren't really discussions that were occurring in our normal space. So it was a lot of learning, and a lot of learning fast, and much of that was really thinking out of the box and identifying, ways that what we would know as, broadband capabilities of public safety, we were creating much of the foundation of the discussions that would occur, and many of those efforts ultimately would, fall into or play into what we know as that of FirstNet today. Interesting thing to share that I don't think I've shared a lot of is even prior to the development of the APCO Broadband Committee, there was an effort that the Department of Homeland Security had invited, and it was maybe 20-ish people from public safety to have a discussion with the National Institute's Standards Technology, their Public Safety Communications Research Arm, or PSCR, in a joint meeting in Washington, D.C. And at that time, there was a lot of discussions, obviously some different leadership that was in place in the federal government and many areas. Some of those, again, predated many of these other efforts, but we were tasked with some discussions, the day-long meeting we had, of thinking out of the box, how communications that would be utilized by public safety would be used. And at that point, it was probably the early discussions that were had on some use cases on how public safety might use something other than voice to communicate amongst themselves. And there was many use cases we had. We were split off into small groups, and even looking back to an ad hoc group of first responders and the discussions we had. And at that time, Greg Riddle was the president of APCO, and I'd gotten the opportunity to meet him, spent some time with him that day we were there, and I think that's what created some opportunities down the road with our efforts with APCO on a much larger scale than just that of our local APCO chapter. But many of those opportunities that we've had that we've been able to be involved with even predated, me and the efforts that the leadership of the Michigan State Police that had been in play. There was, a prior group referred to as PISWIN, or Public Safety Wireless Networks, and that was this earlier group, if you will, of a brain trust of how to increase interoperability. And at that time, much of the discussion was around land mobile radio. So watching it shift from the late 90s, early 2000s of PISWIN, and that also the National Public Safety Telecommunications Council, or NIPSTIC, really laid the groundwork over the past 20, almost 25 years of the work efforts we have today. So, as you asked the question, how did the APCO Broadband Committee play into this? There was actually a lot of other facets that had really grown to what we know here with the MPSCS, and a lot of credit to, my predecessors that were in this role, and even the prior colonels of the state police that had, a hand in, the national discussions around interoperability and how to really affect some positive change for interoperability within the states, as well as collaboration with our other state partners of adjoining states. So we've watched the technology truly change, not only from the technology standpoint, but the people's use of the technology. And no doubt it will continue to see change over the next 25 years of how we use it, how it's used, and with the advent of artificial intelligence, how that will make response and technology even adapt and change in our future as well.
We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back.
Open calendar. What's my schedule looking like?
Next Thursday, you will be caught in an emergency flash flood between Park and First Street.
What? No, that doesn't work. I'm busy then. Decline. Decline.
Floods don't exactly work around your schedule. Disasters don't plan ahead. But you can. It starts with talking to your loved ones about making an emergency plan. So don't wait. Communicate. Visit michigan.gov/MIReady. Brought to you by the Michigan State Police, FEMA, and the Ad Council.
Regardless of what you have seen or heard, 911 cannot locate you immediately when calling from a cell phone. Knowing your location is very important when calling. This is as simple as knowing the address you're calling from, teaching address information to children, and knowing what street you are on while traveling. Know your location.
Since this is a Meet the Director type of conversation here, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't visit some more personal things about you. So is there anything that you can tell us about your family, your hobbies, anything personally related?
Yeah, well, fortunately, I grew up in Michigan until my parents decided it was time to split the sheets. So my mom wanted a little bit warmer, so we ended up, for a hot second in Nashville, Tennessee. So had my experience as a teenage boy and how to pick up the Southern dialect for a little bit there, and picked up some of those key words as a teenager of shoot and y'all was a regular part of my teenage years until we then moved on to Florida, and then I think picked up a little bit of the Florida accent and enjoyed that time down there. But I missed Michigan, or more importantly, I missed skiing in Michigan. So as I graduated, high school and spent a little bit of time in community college, I always wanted to be an engineer. So I made the decision that in order for me to be an engineer, I probably needed to work a little bit harder than what I was. So I moved west with a scholarship to Colorado Tech, and with the thoughts of I'd be able to ski a lot more than I was in Florida. And as part of that decision, I thought it's time to get my engineering degree, and proudly I'd say is I actually finished my electrical engineering degree in 3 years. So I had a passion and pursuit of not starving anymore, so I figured it was best to just plow my way through college and be the engineer I always wanted to be. Fortunately, I was probably somewhat of an oddball, as I knew what my college career choice was going to be at a young age of fourth grade. Fortunately, I was smart enough to be an engineer, but my uncle was an engineer, and for the most part, I always looked up to, and actually still do, look up to my uncle. I always wanted to be just like my Uncle Mike, and he was an engineer, although he was a mechanical engineer. I don't think he could cut as an electrical engineer, so he had to choose a different path. So, but fortunately, again, I was smart enough to be an engineer. If he'd have been a veterinarian, I probably would not have had a fun career choice, because I'm not sure that was a career choice I would have made. But as I finished up college, I met my soon-to-be wife, and we met in Colorado. I worked then in space and defense for a few years, and kind of made the cycle back to Michigan as I was home for a funeral of my stepmother who had passed away, and that was I'd say the introduction of what would soon to be known as Michigan's public safety communication system. Is there was a lady that worked with state police. She worked with the communications division, and she was best friends with my stepmother who had passed away. And as we were talking at the funeral, I said, it was events like this that really make you miss your family, more, even though I loved Colorado and everything that was out there and all the things to do. Really, really miss my family that was here in Michigan. And oddly, as she and I finished our conversation, she said, "Well, the state police is hiring, engineers," and I was slightly dumbfounded why the state police would be hiring engineers. And she sent me, at that time it was a little bit before what we know as the World Wide Web, so things weren't easy to find. But she told me where I could find the postings for the jobs for Michigan, and I filled out an application the old school way. It was on paper, and actually I filled it out on a plane flight to another job interview in the defense sector. At that time, it had something to do with some of the nation's submarines and some of the opportunities that would have played out in a whole different role for defense. But it all worked out. I interviewed while I was home for Christmas, and they pretty much hired me right on the spot. But that was at a time before cell phones and before email, and had to wait until I got all the way back home to Colorado to see an offer letter in the mailbox, and the rest brought me back to Michigan. And with that, as my girlfriend and I, and then became my wife. I had 2 kids that have now both graduated high school. One is a junior at Michigan State, and the other is making his way most likely to a community college and maybe be a pilot one day on commercial airlines if his dreams come out to reality. And fortunately, I've always loved, the high five state of the nation, and, speak highly of the great state that I knew as a kid and then as an adult. Much like everyone else, grew up a college football fan, although there's probably a little more division in my house now than there ever was. As my daughter is a proud Spartan, and even though she attended her fair share of Michigan Wolverine games, we definitely have a little split when it comes that one game day in the fall every year. I love the outdoors, hunting, fishing, just anything, probably outside in the woods, spending time with a huge family. And I love spending time with them. We usually get together quite a few times through the years. My grandmother is referred to as by my kids as party grandma. So she has her fair share of family events throughout the year. And each holiday we have a get-together of all of my aunts and uncles and cousins. So it's as many families are lucky to have one family reunion a year. I think we have a family reunion around every major holiday: Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter, and then of course there's the Cherry Festival and the 4th of July that always brings everyone together. Love hot rods, motorcycles. Wouldn't necessarily say I'm an adrenaline junkie, but you love the lure of some good old school hot rods and car shows, and but even to separate that. Love the peace of the woods and walking on the beach. So definitely a mix of, gunfire and gasoline, and, the peace and tranquility of, the wind through the trees or the ocean breeze.
That's all for today, and we want to thank Brad for being here to tell us about himself and as the Director of Michigan's Public Safety Communications System.
And thank you for having me.
We hope you all enjoyed the show, and we will be back soon from the hot seat to talk with Brad Stoddard about other matters related to MPSCS. You have been listening to Tune In with MPSCS. Be sure to look us up at www.michigan.gov/MPSCS, YouTube, SoundCloud, LinkedIn, and on Twitter at MPSCS. You can also subscribe to our podcast on iTunes so you never miss an episode. We will see you next time.